Hello and welcome to the Board Games as The Last of Us 2 Spoilercast. I'm Oliver Barsby, and with me today I've got Joe and Ishraq, two writers who've written on The Last of Us 2 for the Boar. Joe's article is up at the moment. Ishraq's will be coming out very soon. I've read it today. Yes. It's very good. Keep an eye out for it. So today we are talking about Naughty Dog's recently released The Last of Us Part 2 for the PlayStation 4. We've all played it. We all have some pretty strong opinions on it. I think some similar, some controversial, and some pretty bad opinions, I'll say some of us have. Before we go any further, Joe and Ishraq, why don't you introduce yourselves?
Yeah, sure. I'm Joe. I guess for the sake of all the University of Warwick watchers, I'm a finalist studying politics and slowly coming to terms with the fact I'm either getting a 2-2 or a 2-1 and not a first, which, standard at the start of first year, you wouldn't be wanting that, but there we go. I've played, as regards The Last of Us Part 2, I've played it twice now. I'm going through it for a third time, and I'm currently sort of going on the platinum grind, and it'll be my first ever platinum trophy, but what a way to start.
Yeah. Nice.
Hi, I'm Ishraq. Again, for the sake of Warwick students, I'm a second-year history and politics student, striving to get a 2-2 like Joe. In terms of games, yeah, I'm pretty multifaceted. I've had an Xbox, a PlayStation, PC as well, so I wouldn't say I'm a fanboy to any of them, but I do especially like Naughty Dog games. I've played basically everything they have, and I've only had one playthrough of Last of Us Part 2, but I've gone into it in quite some detail and I'm quite fond of it.
Nice. And I'm Ollie, so I am the editor of the Board Games, and like Ishraq, I've only played the game through once, but I think I went through quite a sort of detailed, long playthrough. I got most of the collectibles in my first play, and I probably will play it again when I have a bit more time, but I'm focusing now on Ghost of Tsushima, which is just
nice.
Very good. I'd recommend it. So, let's get into it. Firstly, when did you play the original Last of Us 2? Let's all get on the same page so we can understand our connections and how The Last of Us 2 sort of plays into our experience with the series in general. Ishraq, when did you first play The Last of Us 2? No, the first Last of Us.
First Last of Us, yeah. I played the original PS3 version way back in, I think, when it was released in 2013, if I'm correct.
Yeah.
So I was like 15. I had very low expectations for it, actually. For some reason, a lot of my schoolmates didn't think it'd be that impressive. Just being another book standard zombie game, especially with Walking Dead and so many zombie series coming out. But then I tried it first time, was a bit skeptical. But then it's sort of how Naughty Dog games are. You sort of get into it and you go more and more into the story. You just wow, you're just unexpectedly attached to these characters and just have a sort of irrational attachment to them, which is how Naughty Dog games are, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah.
Nice.
So I played the original PlayStation 3 version, but unlike Ishraq and his mates, I had really high expectations of it. And then my mate, I didn't own a PlayStation 3, but then my mate who owns a PlayStation 3 said, because you've been wanting to play this game for ages, I've got the game. I'll lend you my PS3 for a week and you can play it. And then obviously I got the PS4 because I did the standard. What a lot of people I think who've owned like one console from each generation, I did the standard, what it seems, transition, which is people have gone from a 360 to a PS4. It seems like that's a common move.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I had a 360, got given the PlayStation 3. I played the first hour incredibly slowly because I wasn't used to having a controller where sort of the sticks were next to each other and not at weird angles. And then, literally. And like most people that played the game, obviously fell in love with it, bought the remastered version on PS4. I still have it. I've got a penchant for trading in every game I play. So I played Red Dead Redemption 2 through twice and then just traded it in or sold it on eBay and stuff like that. I haven't done that with The Last of Us Remastered. I'm not planning on doing it with the second one because it's the only game ever where, especially with the first one, I finished it and just restarted it. straight away and did New Game Plus, and yeah, it blew me away. The graphics on the PS3 were astonishing for the time, and yeah, it was brilliant.
Yeah.
Mm.
You two,
Yeah.
I think, have probably a more attachment than I have to the series, since from my perspective, I only played the first Last of Us in 2018 because, Joe, like you, I started with the Xbox 360, so couldn't play the Last of Us then, and then actually got an Xbox One. My friends were like, get an Xbox One. I was like, okay, Titanfall's quite good, I guess.
Yeah, I was about to say Titanfall. Everyone goes on about Titanfall.
Played that. Then 2018 came around. I was like, okay, Spider-Man PS4 looks pretty good. I want to get this. Bought my PlayStation, played Spider-Man, and then was like, what else is there around? What other exclusives do PlayStation have? Got The Last of Us remastered, played it, as you two did. I absolutely loved it. I thought the storyline was fantastic. Gameplay was okay. I think I had high expectations for the gameplay because I knew that everyone already loved this game. It was already a masterpiece. But then a couple of months ago, again, I played it in preparation for The Last of Us 2. Except I played on PS Now, which means I played the original PS3 version. Which, after playing the remastered version, isn't the best in terms of graphics. But I think it still held up very well. And yep, I went into the second one with high hopes, as you two did. So I'm going to say massive spoiler warning here from here on out. If you've not played The Last of Us 2, I'm going to click this button and it will just come up with a massive spoiler. So here's your 5-second warning. Click off now. Okay.
My heart.
What did we think of Joel dying? What were our thoughts?
Well, I sent the article that I encourage you all to read. That's on the Board Games and the Board website and on various social medias, including mine. I thought the moment the first trailer came out. So, for context, for people that didn't see the first trailer, it's Ellie playing the guitar and lots of different scenes going around whilst Ellie's playing this guitar, and then Joel appears right at the end. And he looked pale, he looked sallow, he looked almost dead to me. And if not dead, he looked like he was dying. And I feel like that trend continued throughout the rest of the marketing material. And so I thought, okay, he's probably going to die. And harking back to The Last of Us 1, obviously when I played it, I was 14. I think Ellie was 14. So I related much more to Ellie's character than I did Joel's. I understood Joel's character. I felt attached to him, but I was much more attached to Ellie than I was Joel, even though I played as Joel for most of it. Now, because of that, I don't think I was affected as much when Joel died. I guess I was watching Game of Thrones at the time, and so I was sort of conditioned to major characters being killed. But at that point, when it all happened, loads of people, all these streamers, Jacksepticeye, PewDiePie, all these standard streamers that have played through The Last of Us Part 2, they go, forget this. They swear like crazy, and then they're really, really angry and really upset. And I just remember sitting there thinking, right, I wonder what they're going to do with this. This is really, really interesting, because it was almost like watching a movie and reading a book. When you hit the opening scene or the opening chapter that is meant to set the stage for the rest of the game, and they did it in a shocking fashion. As regards people saying he was killed or murdered by Abby in such a brutal and horrific way, I'm going to adopt the line that Neil Druckmann has on this, which is the director of the game, just context for people watching, which is that the whole point of The Last of Us world is it's completely unforgiving, and people die at the drop of a hat, and people die in horrible ways that in modern society, in our society, we wouldn't want them to, and we don't think they deserve, such as in the first game, where Tess, who's clearly a more empathetic character towards Ellie than Joel is the one that gets bitten. And then Henry and Sam, Henry commits suicide because he is forced to shoot Sam, and all these sorts of things. So I think when people say he was killed so brutally, it's partially down to the attachment of the character that they had to the character, but they've also got to detach their attachment to understand what Naughty Dog were trying to do there. So yeah, I think that's my main take.
So I had a similar experience. I didn't watch most of the marketing for the game just because I didn't want any spoilers at all, but I did watch the initial reveal. And so it was clear to me that there was a lot of emphasis on Ellie. So I was conditioned to understand that this would be Ellie's story. I didn't know if Joel was going to die or not, but I thought he looked old and virile in it, so he might be in the backbone. He'd be a side character. They might killing him off. It might be part of the narrative, but it wasn't something I was expecting. So when he did die, I was initially shocked, but not too surprised. I did feel it was a bit early initially when I first played because I felt like, well, where's the story going to go from here? But I didn't have that reaction. A lot of streamers did. It was like, well, I've had enough. I'm not playing this game anymore. Joel was like my favorite character. What's the point of this game anymore? No. To me, what I loved about Last of Us was the connection, the relationship between Joel and Ellie. And so I was interested to see how Ellie would respond to Joel dying. I wanted to keep playing. I was in grief. I was. But the idea that I'd be so enraged to just give up and turn the game off it just sounds ridiculous to me. In terms of the brutality, I mean, it's The Last of Us. I didn't know what anyone else was expecting, really, if I'm being honest. And even in all the trailers and the marketing, you saw just Ellie brutally killing people everywhere. So the idea that it was too graphic it just feels bizarre to me. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I think in The Last of Us, no one is ever truly safe from anything. I think that's one thing I would have expected had taken from the first game. Would you say that lots of people who did get angry at Joel dying were, Ishraq, you mentioned there was grief. Would you say that they might have actually been feeling that grief towards Joel dying, like it was actually impacting them, and that's why they reacted with such anger? It was more part of them grieving about Joel rather than actually disagreeing with the game choices.
It's possible. It may be that they just simply exaggerated because they're streamers and that it'd get them more clicks. That is how the streaming world is. So it is very possible that they just use that grief, like, okay, time to get a bunch of clicks. I'm going to be like really like hostile towards this game. So it may not be necessarily that they disagreed with the story choice. But that's if I'm being optimistic. I'm not sure.
Yeah, to add on to that, like anger's obviously a stage of grief, right? So it's perfectly rational for someone to feel angry when someone that they're attached to passes. I think my issue is then when people channel that anger into two things, really. First, they channel that anger without playing the rest of the game into sort of abusive tweets towards major characters or actors of major characters and directors of the game. The amount of abuse I've seen towards people like Laura Bailey, who plays Abby, or Neil Druckmann, the director of the game, or Hallie Gross, one of the lead co-writers and the lead behind narrative. I've never seen that from a video game before. It goes to the point of people getting abuse for like major motion pictures and stuff like that, which is still terrible. But previously, this sort of the industries aren't comparable for that normally, but they are now, and that's my first thing. The second point is, once you get past the fact that you're angry that Joel's died, because I was upset and I did feel anger, but I never felt anger towards the writers. I felt anger towards Abby and whatever. Once you overcome that, there needs to be an element of, okay, they've done this for a reason and they're trying to tell a story. So let them tell that story, and let me not let my anger just make me write off everything that happens in the next part of the story and so forth. And then there's an argument which I find slightly more rational of you sort of Joel dies and then there's only a few scenes and then you're in Seattle and you're just sort of traipsing around with Ellie and Dina. Dina's I'm going to say quite a hot take here, but Dina is my second favorite character in the whole game. I think she's Abby, actually, which is also a hot take.
Very hot take.
But,
yeah.
But either way, my response to that would be, first of all, it's a video game, so there has to be an element of gameplay, and there are that section after Joel's death is layered with cutscene upon cutscene. There's something like 22, 23 minutes of cutscenes from then to the Seattle section, because you meet with Tommy, you meet with Marie, you meet with Dina, and all that. And then following that, when you look at The Last of Us Part 1, no one's ever complained about that before. When Tess dies, you automatically go into gameplay. When Sam and Henry die, it literally just goes to a next chapter, and you're just walking around. And Ellie's even telling a few jokes, and you know they're talking about the toy that Sam had and all that. So I understand that people are that people can be upset by that, but I also think you need to put it into context of it's still a video game, and it's not a video game that's purely reliant on narrative. It is also reliant on gameplay and mechanics. It's not Heavy Rain in that sense. It's slightly more skewed towards the gameplay side. So anybody that's criticising them, I'd just ask them to take a step back and think about what Naughty Dog are trying to do, and also what they're working with. You know?
Yeah, I'd say
Definitely.
to the narrative pacing. I actually completely forgot until just now that we did have an initial short bit after Joel dying where we got to see them go into Joel's house and the gravestone. I completely forgot. Like in my head, it happened. Joel died and went straight to Seattle. So I can see how that's a valid criticism because it wasn't. We didn't really have time to process it. But again, I understand that it is a video game and things need to keep going. I remember being on the horse going towards Seattle and the jokes, and I just had this really I just felt it was very tasteless, very initially, and I really didn't like Dina. It just felt like she was thrown out my face. I knew very little about her, and it just felt like I said this to Joe, oh, Dina's replacing Joel, which wasn't the case, of course. But that's how it felt initially. But again, that came down to you should always keep an open mind, which is what I did, and so by the time you finish the game, you get a better understanding of the relationship between Dina and Ellie and everyone else in the game.
Yeah, definitely. So one thing which you mentioned was the brutal sort of way that Joel died. It was Abby, Joel, your favorite character, who killed Joel quite brutally, as you said, with a golf club right in front of Ellie, who was watching. And quite a lot of anger from Joel's death was not just directed sort of at the game in general, it was directed at the character of Abby. But it wasn't just the fact that Abby killed Joel. It was the fact that you could actually play as Abby. And well, half of the game was made you play as Abby to complete the game. And that is what lots of the anger is also being directed at. So I was wondering how you two felt about having to play as Abby. Did it enhance the game? Was the Abby's section better than Ellie's section, or would you rather it was just one full game as Ellie?
Ishra, go ahead, mate.
Sure, okay. So I think they perfectly split the two characters. I don't see how they could have done it any other way. It's how the narrative was written. You had to play as Abby to really empathize with her and her struggles and why she did what she did, which you can't have done with just some cutscenes. I think I'd be right in saying that it's usually split between 60-40 between Ellie and Abby. I think by the end of the game, I again, controversial point, but I feel like I related to Abby a lot more than I did Ellie by the end of it. I think my only criticism would be that I felt after finishing the game, and especially going back to Ellie, it felt like even though Abby's part was shorter, it felt like Abby's part was a lot more drawn out than I thought it would be. And so by the time I switched back to Ellie, which was after the fight in the theater, and they're back in the farm with Dina and JJ, it just felt a bit jarring. But that might just be me. And it took me a while to get back into empathizing with Ellie again. And I don't think I completely did by the end of the game, but that might have also been the purpose. That might have been intentional, I mean.
Yeah, so like gameplay and mechanics wise, I actually think that Abby's bit was better structured and the gameplay was better than Ellie's section. I think the open world bit in downtown Seattle, I personally just did not like it. I thought I like this sort of narrowness a lot of the time that Naughty Dog script sort of stick to. Not that you had to do everything in the open world, but as a gamer, you always like to find these little cubby holes and the music room, and the fact that you could miss that Take On Me section when Ellie's playing Take On Me by Aha to Dina.
That's one
the
of the
fact that you'd be
best sections in the game.
Yeah, 100%. And it got to the point where I literally, I'd be cooking or something. I'd just be like, Alexa, play Aha, Take On Me. It's like 2017 acoustic edition and stuff like that. But either way, like I thought that bit was, especially, we're talking about just after Joel's died and stuff like that. And even that bit in between Joel dying and you going to Seattle, you're still grieving, and everything makes you grieve more because you go and you see that he's got hobbies, he has bats, all that sort of stuff. You then go into almost like an open world bit, and there's a focus on exploration, which you don't traditionally see in at least the first one. And you've got to sort of wrap your head around the fact that this isn't going to be the first game. Obviously, it's not going to be the first game. But I don't enjoy those. I don't enjoy having games where it's sort of split that way. I'd rather it be all one thing or all another. Again, a lot of people might disagree with me, and I know a lot of people really like that section, but I didn't personally. Whereas with Abby's, there's no section really like that. There's no open world bit to a large extent. I think the mechanics and the world in general are much bigger if we take the downtown Seattle bit aside. The world in general is much bigger when you're playing as Abby. There's a lot more to sort of explore in the normal levels that aren't, quote unquote open world. When it came to sort of walking a mile in Abby's shoes, I think they did it quite well. I think there were similarities between Ellie and Abby, but also similarities between Abby and Joel, which made you, if not attach yourself to Abby, relate to Abby to a certain extent. And the thing that I will never get over, and I'm incredibly critical about, and it's the one thing that I just cannot see the rationale behind, is people that do not see any sort of link or do not see any sort of rationality or morality behind Abby's decision to kill Joel in the first place. Like Abby's decision in terms of revenge is probably the most logical one that most people would have an empathy with, I would assume. He's not just killed her dad, but he's killed loads of her friends, loads of the people she knew, and she spent years trying to find this person. And Joel's just a faceless man to Abby. He's probably got a description, but she's just looking for Joel Miller. And the fact that she says it with such spite when she's about to start torturing him says a lot, right? And so I find it really difficult to see that people just say, oh, well, you've killed Joel, so I hate you. Forgetting the fact that Joel's an incredibly flawed character. He's probably, if you were going to judge it by even The Last of Us standards, he's probably a bad person. He's just had a good 4 years in Jackson. So I've never understood that. And then I'll agree with Ishrak that I found it hard to sort of empathise and relate to Ellie once I'd played as Abby. But I think, again, that's the intention. You do not want Ellie to go back to find Abby, hopefully. Unless you just view Abby as a horrible, immoral figure, in which case I don't understand how you play video games with any sort of nuance. But if you see that scene where Ellie's talking to Dina and she's like, I can't sleep, and Dina just does not understand it and she's so upset, and then 3.5 hours later Ellie comes back and Dina's moved all her stuff into one room in the house. That for me is the most heartbreaking bit, and that's purely because you want to empathise with the Ellie that started the game, not the Ellie that ends the game. And they are different people and completely changed characters to a large extent. And I think by the end of the game, Ellie is walking off. I assume that she's walking off to Jackson, but she could be going anywhere. Ellie is walking off and she's trying to find who she was at the start and find who she was, smoking pot with Dina in a weird sort of, supermarket area. So I think, and just quickly regarding the split, I think the split was fine. I don't understand people that wanted it to be day one Ellie, day one Abby. It would remove all sort of tension from the whole plot, and I find it. I don't understand how you'd be able to structure a decent game around that, to be honest.
Yeah. Well, because I think I completely agree with what both of you have said. When you first become Abby, I think lots of people have a similar reaction to when Joel first dies. They're like angry. They say, "I don't want to play this game anymore. I'm going to stop playing the game here, skip it, and maybe go to the end, watch a video online." And I think that's how Naughty Dog intend you to feel. You're supposed to be like, "Why am I Abby?" You're supposed to feel sort of anger and reluctance to play as Abby almost. And then, as you've said, you sort of start to empathize with her as you go through. And as you get to the end, you can start to, as you said, Ishrak, relate to her more. I think one thing which, Joe, you briefly touched on as well, which I think is really important, is how Abby's section, I thought as well, was actually much more interesting to play than Ellie's. In terms of a storyline, I thought hers was much better. The whole storyline with Lev and going to the island, I thought was one of the most iconic parts of the game. The most memorable moment for me is the island, the hotel when you fall down the sort of ladder thing.
That was great.
And then finally, of course, the hospital basement bit against
terrifying.
The Rat King. I think they are the moments for me where in 6 months, a year, 5 years time, I will remember the game for those moments and those gameplay experiences. And I think they were all from Abby's part, which to me signals that her part was definitely worth putting in. Because if it was just Ellie's game, it would have been okay, decent game, average game, gets a 8 out of 10, sells okay, probably a Last of Us 3 following JJ or something, but the Last of Us, that would have been too safe, it wouldn't have been Naughty Dog if they'd done it like that. That would have been a Ubisoft decision to put it like that.
Yeah.
It would have been a safe, let's make some money decision. And Joe, you briefly mentioned at the end again how you thought that afterwards Ellie had changed. She went back to reflect on it after, and you didn't want to go and kill Abby. You wanted her to, go and live her nice life with Dina, with JJ in the farm. So let's talk about the ending of The Last of Us 2. So where does the ending start? Where would you put the sort of end?
So the way I saw it, when you go back to the farm, that's when the epilogue started. So I say it ended with the theatre in the final showdown, or preliminary showdown, I guess. So I guess I look at the very ending, I guess, from the farm onwards. I guess it's interesting because we were talking just before about how we wouldn't expect a happy ending from a Naughty Dog game. I genuinely don't think I would have been satisfied if Ellie came home to a happy family with Dina and JJ. It just wouldn't be a Naughty Dog game. I mean, I cried my heart out. I did. I'll be honest, and I don't think I would have if she just came back to a very happy dandy family. And also just thinking about the final fight in the beach with Abby and Ellie, and just giving those bottom prompts to like hit each other. I felt genuinely uncomfortable doing it. I felt like the characters, it just felt wrong. You played for Abby for hours, and now you're just like brutally hitting it. Like I don't think there's any other game in the world where you get to a final boss fight and you go, I don't really want to do this. Like it's just astounding. I have no criticism of it at all, personally.
Yeah, I think so. There's critical junctures and like inflection points in the whole game, right? Where you're always questioning, are these things good? Are these things bad? And I think one of the most important ones, which isn't touched upon as much, is Abby's decision, almost through Lev, not to kill Dina in the theatre at the end, or near the end, rather. And that for me is really important, because I think Dina, and people can disagree with me on this, and they're more than welcome to. They would be wrong, but they can disagree with me on it. In that she's meant to represent a character that's fundamentally not softer, but more closer to almost a concept of kindness than Ellie's character is. She doesn't have that drive to kill Joel. She's going because Ellie's been her best friend for years and is now her girlfriend. And I think that's really important because it symbolizes that Naughty Dog won't just want to play with your emotions and make you feel miserable. That's not the point of the game. The game does make you feel miserable, but that's the whole point of the game is not just some torturous bit by bit section of people dying and making you feel horrible. And if it was, you'd just put the game down, and it would get panned by critics as well. And I think that's incredibly important, because then you become attached to Dina even more because you know what she means to Ellie, and then you become attached to her even more in the farmhouse. And then when you realise that she's no longer there, that attachment and that idea that Ellie literally now has no one is so important. I kind of agree with Ishraq. I would appreciate some DLC, to be honest, just to sometimes I will sit and think, and I know it's quite sad, but I will sit and think for 35 solid minutes about why I don't know where Dina and Ellie are going to be. I don't know where Abby and Lev are and all that sort of stuff. I assume they've got to Catalina Island because of the loading screen at the end. But all that sort of stuff. I can't really criticise it. And the bit at the end as well where you're sort of tying it all together with this final flashback of Joel and Ellie really does it for me, where you realise the whole purpose of the story is not just what you think it is, not just blind anger and blind revenge. It's this inability to not just lose someone you love, but lose someone you were learning to love again. That you've gone through this loving process with once, and you need to go through it again for your sake and for Joel's sake, and that is just completely gone out the window. And it also, when you're playing New Game Plus, all these little indicators of that are actually, you're able to notice, you know, when Ellie says, "Oh, me and Joel are going to watch a movie tonight," and something like that, and you play it straight. I played it straight away, and it completely tugged at my heartstrings. I thought, "Oh no, that is, you know, I can't even think about that right now." I don't really have a criticism of the ending. I think there are some people, and I will accept this one, that they think the Rattlers are underdeveloped. But there is a point where you think, did you want this game to be released in 2023? Because that's what you're asking them to do. It's a 30-hour game. It's 26 and a half hours on average it takes someone to complete it. And unless you want to make it 33, 34 hours long, there's going to be an element of underdevelopment. Not saying that that's a good thing on Naughty Dog's side, but also I don't think the Rattlers need to be developed. No. You know, there's no point in developing them. They play a very specific role in the story, and they probably won't come around again. No. So, you know, or at least I'd be shocked if they did. So those are my sort of general thoughts on the ending. And the major theme, I think, just one more, just dead quickly, is like this concept of purpose. And there's always a purpose for everyone in the game at every single point. You know, whether they're micro purposes like Abby going to find Owen or something like that, or a major purpose like Ellie trying to get revenge against Abby. That's sort of the general theme for me. And then at the end of the game, we don't know where Abby and Lev are. We don't know what their purpose is apart from just to join the Fireflies. But we're not playing as them at that point. And Ellie then has no purpose. And so you are left in the wilderness, both in your thoughts about where the characters are going to be, but also as characters, they are completely lost. You know? Yeah,
definitely. I think you were right about the length of a game. One thing which critics did actually say was The Last of Us 2 is already too long. So using another section to sort of explore California as the Rattlers might have, it could have filled in some people's criticism of that, but would have, again, made the game so much longer and more of a chore to play, I guess, towards the end. And as you've said, with the people don't remember that in the first game, you know, it would jump from season to season. Just in the instant, it would be spring, and then it would turn to fall, and then to winter. So with no explanation as to how Joel and Ellie got to these locations. So it is already a proven The Last of Us sort of way they progress the story just by quickly cutting to the future.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, it's fine. You go.
I was just going to say the structure of the stories is completely different at this point, where you're just thinking you are looking at a really small time frame, you know, an absolutely tiny time frame as regards the whole of Ellie's life, and so you're able to see these really personal these really personal, private things that are impacting Ellie over the course of just a few days. And same with Abby, but more with Ellie if we're making a comparison between the first game and this one. And having the seasons thing, it's a kind of classic video game idea, isn't it? It's very linear. You go from season to season, and those mark different character progressions. It's incredibly bold, and I think effective of Naughty Dog to just go, we're throwing that out the window. We're making this really, really, really tight knit, and we want to look at all these. I'm not going to call them microaggressions because that's not what they are, but all these things that are affecting someone in such a short space of time that can affect their character so much. When Ellie comes back after torturing Nora, for example, that's a prime example. But yeah, sorry, continue.
Nope, that's all I was going to say. I was going to say, now that we've discussed the ending, I know you two love the ending, but some people don't, do they? Not everybody loves the ending. Not everyone loves the game in general. So I guess the next question is, why do you think people actually hate the game? And what would your response be to some of the wider criticisms of The Last of Us 2?
So I can think of one legitimate criticism, which I find difficult to argue, which is that some people just don't like the gameplay, which is fair enough. Yeah. Some people say it's a masterpiece. I do think the animations and the sort of in between, the way they transition between moves and things in the game is spectacular. But I do agree that it's not the most advanced AI in the world. Stupid things happen with the NPCs. Sometimes you get caught out of nowhere. You spawn next to dogs. There are annoying things. It's a video game. There are bugs and things. But I do get that some people found the stealth not really well fleshed out, which is fair enough. But I do think, however, back to the split between Abby and Ellie, I found that they have slightly different weapons and slightly different ways of doing things. I found that a really, really cool attention to detail that most people don't give credit for. That because of their different body builds, they have different weapons and the way they approach different situations. In terms of other criticisms, such as the ending, I think most of it is a subjective thing that I'm not happy with the ending. I'm not necessarily happy with the ending, but it's not about what I feel subjectively. It's about, this was a narrative made by Neil Druckmann and the rest of the team at Naughty Dog, and am I satisfied with the conclusion? And I would say to that, yes, even if I don't necessarily agree with everything.
Yeah. I mean, I'll just touch very briefly on the whole transphobia, homophobia. Yeah. It's just sort of grow up. Come on. There's a question, and I'm not going to be controversial here because I'm going to make a point, and then I'm going to massively backtrack on the point because it's really not my place to say it. But there's genuine criticism that obviously Lev has a dead name because Lev's a trans character, and the dead name's used by the Seraphites and the Scars, as the wolves call them, to identify who Lev is. Now, I understand what Naughty Dog are trying to do there, and as a cis white man, without going too political and really getting my degree out, I am not offended by the fact a dead name is used because it's never affected me, and I don't know the effect it's had on me. I also completely understand what Naughty Dog are trying to do, and that they're trying to demonstrate that this religious cult and this religious fanaticism can be considered reflective of the religious fanaticism of this time, where you say, forget it, I'm just going to use the name that your mother gave you, and I don't really care what gender you believe you are, or what gender you define yourself as, and what pronouns you use, and whatever. So I understand what they're trying to do there. That being said, I have talked to a few trans people that have played the game, and they just find it offensive, and that is a difficult thing to sort of argue against. And also, it's completely not my place. And if I was trans, I would understand where they're coming from, I'm sure. But obviously, in this instance, I can't. It's not that I don't, but I can't. The second thing is there's a criticism of Manny. That because he's from Mexico, everybody just wants it. The fact that he's using Spanish words, despite having lived in America for years, surely, and and we're talking Northwest America as well. It's in Washington State, right? So it's rainy. The fact that he just calls people random Spanish swear words is just a bit
burn in
bit
hell,
stereotyping.
someday hell.
Yeah, and all that sort of stuff. And the thing is, like, I can't say anything because it's like, well, yeah, you're right. It's a bit, it's probably a bit stereotyping. There we go. General criticism of the game, ones that I will take, sort of take that aren't to do with sort of identity and stereotypes. So I think those ones are relatively valid. Like ideas that we shouldn't have to play as Abby because that's not the game that I want. Well, I didn't want Tess to die in the first game, but Tess died. Like it's, and I know that you can't compare Tess' death to Joel's death. I'm not trying to, but all I'm trying to say is they're taking you on a story, and when you go on a story, the whole point is that you need to try and embrace it. And if you refuse to embrace a story, you're never going to like stories that you disagree with, or you're never going to even listen to stories that you disagree with. And that seems very echo chambery and very, very much like you're just going to end up liking one game ever, and it'll just be a game that you continually love, and that's just The Last of Us 1. At the same time, because the story is much more nuanced and they're taking more risks, it leaves it open to more criticism about subjective things that are difficult to argue both for and against because they are about personal preference. In the first one, the story is incredibly linear and the narrative is incredibly linear, right? So the story, until the end, right? The story is you need to get someone from A to B. That's, in the real base of it, the whole story as regards to the main objective of the game. The narrative is about the developing relationship between Joel and Ellie. Now, although there are complexities to that, a father-daughter developing relationship is not something that's new either in video games or in general media. In The Last of Us, and again, the only moral complexity really is the decision that Joel makes at the end, which I would argue, and I think it's difficult to argue against, is probably one of the most objectively bad decisions by any character in the whole series. Now, The Last of Us 2, rather than asking one moral question at the end of the game, starts with a moral question and continues to throw moral questions at you as you watch characters that you usually love become characters that you start to dislike. And that's not a fault of storytelling, and that's not a fault of writing. That's how life works, and that's how we're meant. And it's a test. It's testing our ability to embrace the game. And Neil Druckmann said he knew people that played the first game. A lot of them would not like this game, but the whole point is not to please the player. The whole point is to make the player embrace the story and come across and try and figure out what it's like to walk a mile in somebody else's shoes. So I wholeheartedly reject the idea that we just have to write off certain characters because they do certain things to certain people. As regards the ending, I don't understand why people have any significant criticisms of it, apart from that they just think the last bit was too long. And that's just a bit of an extra staple that makes no sense. But your question's really specific, which is not why do people have problems with the game, but it's why do people hate the game?
Yeah, because The Last of Us 2, it's not just people dislike it, it's active hatred of the game, both online, on Metacritic, as you mentioned earlier, towards the actors, towards the creators of the game, towards fans of the game. Anywhere you go online, for about 2-3 weeks after the game came out, it was all you would see, polarizing opinions on the game.
Well, just really quickly, a lot of the Metacritic stuff I just don't buy at all, because I think it's something like 80% of the negative ratings by users on Metacritic were done within the first 2 days. In what
we
world?
have an article coming out on that soon.
Yes,
Yeah.
very soon.
Well, exactly. In what world do you think that you've played the full game and thought about the game? Because you can't form an opinion. I mean, my mate, funnily enough, my other friend Ish, he finished the game literally at 5 today, and he's played it. He started playing it about a week ago, and he played maybe 5 hours a day, which shows how long the game is, right? And he says I do not know what to think. The game is brilliant, but I also hate it. And I need to have a few days to rethink about it and eventually replay it. And the idea that you're going to be able to make a strict judgment on the game within 2 days is just moronic, and I don't understand how you're able to do it. The abuse towards characters, and I've gone over this, and the abuse towards actors is just unbelievably dense, and it shows a very simplistic mindset that you think that this is, that this is either an acceptable or even a logical thing to do, because actors are actors, they act. If you want to criticize anybody rationally, you do the people that direct the story, which are Neil Druckmann and Ali Gross. Overall, though, you still shouldn't be saying that you want to kill people's children. That's just seems pretty blind obvious to me. And then I guess the only other thing that I can't argue with, and I said, it's all about people's perceptions, is people are like, well, I don't relate to Abby, and I just didn't find Abby to be a good character. And there's nothing I can say to that, is there? Because all I can say is, well, I did, and these are the reasons why. And they can say, oh yeah, but that just didn't work for me. I'll say, well, okay, well, cool. I can't convince you. And again, that's why Neil Druckmann says this game will not work for everyone. And I think he's accepted that. And that's why there's been so little sort of rebuttal and stuff directed back at these people, back at the sort of abusers of the actors and whatever, because they know that this was going to get blowback, but also they know that even if they say, please stop doing this, and they keep on saying it, there's going to be a very, very, very small but vocal section of Twitter that's just going to pile on and post horrific graphic memes about characters, So, yeah. Again, hatred's just way too strong. I don't understand how you can hate this game.
Well, I think it's... So the gaming community is still a largely young community, and I think a lot of people putting reviews or shouting on the internet are quite young, 12, 13, 14, maybe 15. And I think that's where a lot of it comes from. They're just very childish, and the internet's anonymous, and you can find a platform to just start trolling and say rude things. So I think that's where a lot of it comes from. And also with that young crowd, they're very impressionable. So when you see YouTubers going, oh my God, they killed Joel, this game is terrible, they think, oh, well, this game must be terrible, I need to hate this game. And there's just this sort of hive mind where everyone has to think the same thing, which is, I think, what happened in the first few days since release. And then it just sort of sped on there. But I think slowly, you see that Metacritic too, people that have genuinely played the game and taken time to reflect on it do have positive impressions of the game. And so I think, it's largely a vocal minority on the internet that hate this game. Yeah.
And just to add on to it, I know there are some people that say, oh yeah, the game's just really, really hard. Like, well, just lower the difficulty. Like, that's the whole point of it. Yeah. They've even got, it's so good, the fact that they've got, you can make allies really, really weak.
Oh yeah. The accessibility
enemies really, really strong.
Yeah, it's fantastic. Yeah.
The most accessible game I've ever seen in terms of, I mean, it can give you directions to everywhere, it can take out the quick time events. Yeah, you can make it as easy as possible. And you could essentially just not have to play this game, just go through it and experience it.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure
there's a blind person that played this game. A blind person.
Yeah.
And he played it with no assistance from anyone else. That's how insane these accessibility features are. I've never heard of anything like that.
It's one thing which unfortunately people haven't. So since the game's got so many other aspects which people have been discussing, it's one which has gone under the radar. Which I hope in a few years' time or soon, more developers start to pick up on, and it becomes the norm of the industry.
Sorry, go ahead.
Nope, you go.
I was just saying the only downside, and this isn't a downside as regards sort of the more accessibility features, the better. But all that means is that obviously, if you've got lots of accessibility features, games will cost more and take longer to develop. But overall, again, I've not got a disability, and if I was a game producer, I would be thinking I want as many people to experience this game as possible, whether they are able-bodied or not. And so, there will be some really sort of Machiavellian producers that think, let's just get it out to people that have, the people that are completely able-bodied, and let's just get it out and produce it. I'm looking at you, Ubisoft. But apart from them, they're probably, as you guys say, hopefully this is the spark of a lot more accessibility features in future games.
Nice. Now, I've got one more question for you guys, which I didn't sort of brief you with before because I thought we'd leave it as a little surprise, so that Joe can't prepare. it's not the most inventive of questions, but I just want to ask, what would you guys want to see in a potential The Last of Us 3? If you even want a Last of Us 3.
I do want a Last of Us 3. But I remember when I finished the first game and everybody said, "Oh yeah, I don't want a Last of Us 2." It's like, you did want a Last of Us 2. you just thought that story was complete. Like, it's not the same thing. Like, if you could go back into the Last of Us world and play another story, you would. You just thought that Joel and Ellie, you can finish that story and it'd be fine. And also, I think people that say they didn't want Last of Us 2 were just scared that they were going to mess up the story or whatever, as a lot of people think they have. With The Last of Us 3, I'd find it very difficult to split it with like an Abby-Ellie split again, where you're playing as Abby and you're playing as Ellie. And I don't think they'd do that, because we didn't see this coming in the second game. So I doubt they're just going to repeat it for the third game. At the same time, they are in two completely different scenarios, and they've gone through two remarkably similar but also remarkably different experiences after the course of the second game. And so it would be very hard to put them together into a decent narrative, unless it involved Abby joining up with the Fireflies, her saying, "I met the person that did this," there being another surgeon miraculously that's able to perform a surgery in the way that her dad was able to, and then going to find Ellie. I think that's too easy a storyline, so I don't think they're going to do that. I think they'd be mugging. Well, I'd feel a bit mugged off, to be honest, if they did that. What would I want to see? The romantic inside me is dying to see Ellie and Dina back together. And the only other side of it is that when you're in The Last of Us, and I'm thinking rationally here, when you're in any Last of Us game, 95% of the time you're playing with someone alongside you. You know, you've got a Dina, you've got a Manny, you've got an Owen maybe, you've got a Jesse. And if you're just Ellie on your own, that'll seem like quite an isolating experience, and it won't exactly have much to do cutscene-wise. Overall, do I think that Ellie's story is done? Probably. So I think that we'd have to go down the Abby route. I think that I can leave this hoping in the back of my mind that Ellie's going to meet up with Dina, and Neil Druckmann and Halle Gross won't need to say anything, and I wouldn't be completely happy with it, but I would understand it, and I'd be like, okay, you know what, I'm just going to live on that and probably read a few fan fictions to make myself feel better. Now, when it comes to the Abby and Lev stuff, everyone wants to play as Lev. I didn't relate to Lev. I didn't actually find him that amazing a character. I just thought he was a happy-go-lucky kid to a large extent. But overall, I wouldn't want to play as it. I'd want to play as Abby because I really liked Abby as a character and I related to her. And she was completely different gravy to Joel in that she's a similar age to me. She obviously likes the gym like I do. So you know, we get on. We
still have more games to make, mate.
Yeah, I know. Don't get me started. The quarantine's been horrible. But generally, I think it'd have to centre around that, and it'd have to centre around the Fireflies, and you could then reorient it to see. Are we viewing the Fireflies as good people or bad people? Because overall, I think people think the Fireflies are good. And all this sort of stuff, and so that's what I tried to see. The difficulty is, and I think everyone will agree with me here, is that if I come up with a really sort of convoluted plot about something going down a certain way, I know that Naughty Dog will just come up with something that's completely different because they are completely unpredictable, and it won't help me for the life of me to actually say anything or come up with anything completely nuanced. But I would like to play as Abby. I wouldn't like to play as Lev. I'd like it to be something to do with the Fireflies. If we can get Ellie involved at some point, that would also be cool. And if again, because she's my second favourite character, if Dina's there, why not? And also, blanket statement, I would not want to play as JJ. Completely underdeveloped character. He's not even got a speaking part.
Poor JJ.
I want to be a 10-year-old JJ. Why not? No, absolutely not. So, on a business perspective, there's definitely going to be a part 3, simply because it's their best-selling game. Sony will obviously order another game for the PlayStation 5. Undoubtedly, it's going to happen. I just feel like, so part of me is a masochist. I'm quite happy and I'm not happy, but I'm satisfied with Ellie leaving, and a lot of people believe she's going back to Jackson. I think she's going off on her own, which just makes me hurt my feelings.
I cannot understand. I
I
accept that you think that, but I cannot understand how anybody can sleep at night.
Don't know why.
As I said, I'm a masochist. I enjoy that. Very weird, I know, but so I do think it'll have to do something with Abby and Lev going to the Fireflies. I don't see them making another, going back to like revisiting the plot of the first game where they somehow try and find another surgeon and try and get a vaccine of Ellie. I don't think that's going to happen. I think that's too simplistic. It's not going to be what Naughty Dog does. So there is going to have to be some sort of I don't want to say convoluted, but something unique to be made. I just don't see where that's going to go.
Yeah.
So, but I do think, given that this is called Part 2, it's not just a second game. It's not just like every other game in front. It's not Call of Duty 25, right? It's something that's very solid and significant. So if they are going to make a Part 3, that means they genuinely believe there is more story to tell, and I know that they're going to do it well. At least I hope so. As to where it's going, like I said, probably Abby and the Fireflies. I don't see how they can put all the majority of the emphasis on that, just because I know in terms of marketing they're going to have to try and put Ellie into it just because it sells more games. So I think she'll play a significant part in it. I couldn't tell you what that story is going to be, but I feel like it'd be a sort of a satisfying conclusion to the world, and in a way where it sort of match the sort of bleak but also the glimpses of love and happiness that you find in this franchise.
I'm just saying, like, in the first, I think it's weekend, it sold 4 million copies, right? Yeah. It's already the third highest selling game of the year, and it's not even been out a month. So that says a lot. But also, in comparison, if we think about how much it costs to buy the Naughty Dog game, that's also not even including like resales. And there will have been a lot of people that saw Joel dying, turn off, get their disc, throw it back in the thing, send it back.
There'll be a lot of people who buy it for the PlayStation 5 when they inevitably switch over.
Oh,
to
that
Xbox
too.
One.
That's the other thing. But also, if you think about how much a game like that cost, so my edition, which was the limited edition that everybody seems to have, so it's obviously not that limited.
The Steelbook one.
Yeah, the Steelbook one, which is just so cool.
Everyone has.
I love Steelbooks. I think I've got the only Steelbooks I've got now are that and Life is Strange, which tells you what I think about games that have hard decisions in them. But overall, 4 million copies, it's about $60 per game, right? So that is, what, $240 million in the first 3 days made gross. If we're taking out marketing and all that sort of stuff, then you're probably looking at $100 million pure profit within the first 3 days of development. So the idea that they're not going to go, right, let's chuck all of this straight back into developing Last of Us Part 3. And also, I'm pretty sure that they said they were going to use it because although they're going to make Part 3, although they're remaining incredibly ambiguous in Spoliercast and stuff about whether it's definitely going ahead or not, they've said stuff like, obviously, the next IP it'll either be a new IP that they do next or The Last of Us Part 3, or even further down the line, they've also sort of said that there are some things that we thought about putting into this game and some concepts that we wanted to focus on that we just didn't have space for, or we tried to fit in and they just didn't seem right, that we might save for the next game, or we might save, or that we're trying to save so we're not going to talk to you about, and all that sort of stuff. Whether that means they're putting those concepts or those narratives into a new IP, I'd be very surprised if they did. So, I just generally assume that there's going to be a third one on the back of those conversations. And as well, if you thought that the first one didn't end on that much of a cliffhanger, the second one did. Yeah. And it seems much more open to a sequel. And I think there'd be a lot more people that were upset that this one wouldn't get a sequel than there would have been upset if the first one didn't get a sequel.
Yeah, definitely. No, it's going to be Naughty Dog. They've got some high expectations already going into this game. And I think in the future, there's going to be even more expectations on them, whether through the next new IP they make or in The Last of Us 3, which will probably not be until near the end of the PlayStation 5 era, unfortunately for us. So we'll be waiting a long time.
If we're thinking like year, I played the first game when I was 14. I will be 28 when The Last of Us Part 3 comes out.
There we are.
I hopefully will be 7 years into a very nice grad job, but we'll see.
That's a nice, hopeful note for us to end on. In 7 years' time, you can be sat there, not uncertain, not quarantined in your room without a gym.
Financially secure.
Financially secure. And you can be sat there playing The Last of Us 3 and just enjoying whatever expectations Naughty Dog subvert. And who knows where they're going to go.
Absolutely. Yeah.
100%.
Nice. So this has been the Board Games The Last of Us Part 2 Spoilercast. Thank you so much for watching. I've had a great time doing this with Joe and Ishraq. I hope you two have enjoyed this too.
We agreed on a lot of things, so there we go.
Make sure to check out their Twitter handles, which I will be linking down below in the description, and their articles on The Last of Us Part 2 and other ones they've written for the Boar in general. They're all great. I've read them all, of course. So make sure to check them out. And thanks for watching. Bye.
Bye.